Most Americans believe that keeping cash is the safest financial decision they can make. Money in a checking or savings account feels stable, accessible, and protected from market swings. For many households, especially those approaching retirement, holding cash is seen as a responsible choice. The problem is that this sense of safety is misleading. While the dollar amount on the account statement stays the same, the real value of that money declines every year. The core issue is inflation. Inflation does not require bad decisions, risky behavior, or economic crises to cause damage. It works quietly in the background. If inflation averages 3% per year, cash that earns close to zero loses about 3% of its purchasing power annually. That loss is not visible as a withdrawal, fee, or market drop. It happens silently. Consider a simple example. An individual keeps $50,000 in cash across checking and savings accounts. If inflation runs at 3%, the real value of that money drops by about $1,500 in 1 year. Over 5 years, the cumulative loss in purchasing power is roughly $7,000. Over 10 years, it approaches $13,000. The account balance still reads $50,000, but what that money can actually buy is significantly less. This is not a theoretical model. It is basic arithmetic. Many people believe they are doing the right thing because cash does not fluctuate. There are no headlines about losses, no red numbers, no volatility. This creates the impression of control. In reality, the lack of movement is exactly the problem. Cash provides nominal stability, but no real protection. When inflation exceeds interest earned, holding cash guarantees a negative real return. This problem affects a broad range of Americans. Younger households often accumulate large cash balances out of caution or uncertainty. Older households do so to avoid risk and preserve capital. In both cases, the logic is similar. Avoid losses by staying in cash. What is often missed is that inflation represents a loss just as real as a market decline, even if it feels different. The impact becomes more serious over time. A household holding $100,000 in cash at a 3% inflation rate loses about $30,000 in purchasing power over 10 years. At 4%, the loss exceeds $40,000. These numbers matter because most financial plans assume that cash will be there when needed. The plan fails not because the money disappears, but because it no longer covers the same expenses. Another reason this issue is underestimated is that inflation does not affect all expenses evenly. Healthcare, insurance, housing-related costs, and services often rise faster than the general inflation rate. These categories represent a growing share of spending for middle-aged and older Americans. As a result, the real-world impact of inflation on household budgets can be higher than official averages suggest. At this stage, the goal is not to propose a solution or promote specific strategies. The key point is understanding the problem clearly. Keeping large amounts of cash is not a neutral decision. It is an active financial choice with predictable consequences. The longer the time horizon, the larger the cost. Before discussing alternatives, it is essential to recognize that cash is not risk-free. It carries a different kind of risk, one that compounds quietly and steadily over time. To understand why holding excess cash is so common in the United States, it is necessary to look at both income structure and behavior. For most households, income is received monthly through wages, pensions, Social Security, or business cash flow. Expenses are also monthly and predictable. Cash naturally becomes the buffer between these two streams. Over time, that buffer often grows larger than intended, not because of strategy, but because there is no system guiding its role. Behavior plays a central role. Many Americans equate risk with market volatility. Stock market declines are visible, emotional, and widely discussed. Inflation, by contrast, is abstract. There is no single moment when it happens. As a result, people actively avoid market risk while passively accepting inflation risk, even though both affect real wealth. This behavioral bias leads to decisions that feel conservative but are financially costly over long periods. A common real-life scenario illustrates this clearly. Consider a household in its late 50s with $120,000 in cash savings. The intention is to stay flexible, cover emergencies, prepare for retirement, and avoid losses. The money sits in a savings account earning around 1%. Inflation averages 3%. Each year, the household loses about 2% in real terms, or roughly $2,400. Over 10 years, the purchasing power loss exceeds $20,000. The household did not overspend, speculate, or make mistakes. The loss occurred simply because the cash had no defined purpose beyond safety. Another example involves working professionals in high-cost areas. A family earning $150,000 annually keeps $80,000 in cash due to job uncertainty and market fear. Financial advice often tells them to keep more cash for security. That advice ignores scale and duration. Holding 6 months of expenses in cash is prudent. Holding several years' worth without a plan is not. Over a decade, inflation alone erodes a meaningful portion of that capital, reducing future options such as early retirement, education funding, or healthcare coverage. Standard advice fails because it focuses on isolated actions rather than structure. Save more, avoid debt, and stay liquid are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Saving without a purpose creates idle capital. Liquidity without limits becomes a long-term drag. Avoiding debt does not offset the silent cost of inflation if assets are not working. Another common recommendation is to wait for better conditions before investing. This approach assumes that inflation pauses while people wait. It does not. Delaying decisions is itself a decision with measurable consequences. A few years of inaction during moderate inflation can undo years of disciplined saving. The deeper issue is the absence of a defined role for cash. Cash should serve a function: short-term expenses, emergencies, or planned purchases. When it becomes a long-term holding by default, it stops being a safety tool and becomes a liability. This is not a matter of income level or financial sophistication. It is a structural problem. Understanding this shifts the conversation. The question is no longer whether cash is good or bad. The question is how much cash is appropriate, for how long, and for what purpose. Without answering those questions, households unintentionally trade visible risk for invisible loss. The financial damage caused by holding too much cash does not come from one dramatic mistake. It comes from a set of common decisions that appear reasonable in isolation but create predictable losses over time. These mistakes are widespread across income levels and age groups. The first major mistake is treating cash as a long-term store of value. Many Americans keep large balances in checking or savings accounts not for a specific purpose, but just in case. Cash is excellent for short-term needs. It is not designed to preserve purchasing power over long periods. When inflation averages 3% and cash earns close to 1%, the real loss is about 2% per year. On $75,000, that is $2,500 annually. Over 10 years, the cumulative purchasing power loss exceeds $14,000. Over 20 years, it approaches $27,000. The mistake is not holding cash. The mistake is holding it indefinitely without limits. The second mistake is assuming that higher income offsets poor structure. Many households believe that as long as they earn well, inefficiencies do not matter. This is incorrect. A household earning $200,000 that holds $150,000 in idle cash experiences the same inflation math as a household earning $70,000 with $30,000 in cash. The difference is scale, not logic. Inflation does not adjust its effect based on income. Over time, poor decisions compound regardless of how much money flows in. The third mistake is focusing on volatility instead of real outcomes. People often reject any strategy that involves short-term fluctuation, even if the long-term expectation is positive. They prefer a stable balance over a growing one with ups and downs. The consequence is predictable. Avoiding visible volatility leads to guaranteed, invisible loss. This is not a matter of risk tolerance. It is a misunderstanding of risk itself. The fourth mistake is failing to project decisions forward. Many financial choices are evaluated year by year. The real damage appears only when viewed over longer horizons. Consider two scenarios over 15 years. Scenario A: $100,000 remains in cash, earning 1% while inflation averages 3%. Real value after 15 years, approximately $74,000. Scenario B: the same $100,000 earns a modest 3% real return. Real value after 15 years, approximately $156,000. The difference is more than $80,000. This gap is not caused by speculation or timing. It is caused by structure. The fifth mistake is believing that inaction is neutral. Doing nothing feels safe, but financially it is not neutral. In an inflationary environment, inaction is equivalent to choosing a negative real return. This choice is rarely acknowledged, which is why the consequences are often a surprise. The long-term effects are clear. After 5 years, households notice reduced flexibility. After 10 years, plans such as early retirement, relocation, or healthcare funding become constrained. After 20 years, financial stress appears even in households that did everything right. These outcomes are often blamed on the economy, policy, or bad luck. In reality, they stem from decisions made years earlier. The core problem is not income, discipline, or effort. It is the absence of a system that defines what cash is for and what it is not. Without that structure, even well-intentioned decisions produce long-term losses that quietly reshape financial outcomes. The solution to the cash problem is not to eliminate cash or to take aggressive financial risks. It is to give cash a clear role and to place the rest of the money into a system designed to preserve purchasing power over time. This approach focuses on structure rather than prediction. The first step is separating money by function. Cash should be held for specific short-term purposes. This includes daily expenses, emergency reserves, and known upcoming costs. For most households, this amount equals 6 to 12 months of essential expenses. Money beyond that threshold is no longer serving a liquidity function. At that point, keeping it in cash exposes it to inflation without providing additional safety. The second step is defining a medium and long-term bucket. This portion of capital is not needed immediately and therefore does not require daily access. Its role is not rapid growth, but protection against the gradual loss of purchasing power. Historically, diversified assets have provided returns that exceed inflation over long periods. This does not mean constant gains or zero volatility. It means that over time, the real value tends to be maintained or increased. The mechanics are straightforward. By limiting cash to its functional role, the household reduces the portion of money that is guaranteed to lose value each year. By placing excess funds into a broadly diversified structure, the household introduces long-term compensation for inflation. This system does not rely on market timing, forecasts, or frequent decisions. It relies on consistency. Consider a practical example. A household holds $120,000 in cash. Annual expenses are $60,000. They designate $30,000 as a 6-month reserve. Another $20,000 is set aside for planned near-term expenses. The remaining $70,000 is allocated for long-term value preservation. Even if this portion achieves a modest real return of 2% to 3% over time, the overall financial position improves significantly compared to leaving the entire amount in cash. This approach is stable because it balances different risks instead of concentrating on one. Cash protects against short-term uncertainty. Diversified long-term assets protect against inflation. Neither part is asked to do the other's job. The system acknowledges that volatility and inflation are different risks and addresses both. A clear withdrawal framework further increases stability. Instead of taking money randomly or reactively, withdrawals are planned. Short-term needs are met from cash reserves. Long-term assets are left to work through market cycles. This reduces the likelihood of selling during unfavorable conditions and removes emotion from decisions. Importantly, this is not about maximizing returns. It is about minimizing predictable loss. Holding excessive cash guarantees erosion. A structured approach reduces that erosion while maintaining flexibility. It does not require complex products, constant monitoring, or financial expertise. It requires clarity of purpose. The result is a financial setup that is resilient rather than reactive. Cash remains available when needed. The rest of the capital is positioned to maintain real value. Over time, this system replaces silent loss with measurable stability without introducing unnecessary risk. The issue with holding excess cash can be summarized in a simple framework. Cash is useful, but only when it has a defined purpose. Beyond that role, it becomes a source of predictable loss. The mistake is not caution. The mistake is allowing caution to replace structure. A functional system has three components. First, operational cash. This covers regular expenses and short-term emergencies. It provides flexibility and peace of mind, but it is intentionally limited. Second, planned use capital. This money is reserved for known future needs within the next few years, such as healthcare costs, home repairs, or planned lifestyle expenses. Third, long-term capital. This portion is not needed immediately and is positioned to preserve purchasing power over time. This system changes financial outcomes gradually but meaningfully. After 1 year, the primary difference is clarity. Cash balances are intentional, not accidental. Spending and reserves are separated. Financial decisions become easier because each dollar has a role. Inflation still exists, but it is no longer ignored. After 5 years, the structural benefits become visible. Households that follow this approach typically maintain more of their real purchasing power than those holding excess cash. Short-term needs are met without stress. Long-term capital has time to absorb market cycles. The household is less reactive because fewer decisions are made under pressure. After 10 years, the difference is substantial. In a cash-heavy approach, purchasing power is noticeably reduced, even if nominal balances remain high. In a structured approach, the financial position is more stable. Options remain open. Retirement timing, healthcare choices, and lifestyle decisions are made from a position of control rather than constraint. The practical steps to implement this system are straightforward. First, calculate annual essential expenses and set a cash reserve that realistically covers that period. Second, identify upcoming known costs over the next few years and separate that money from both daily cash and long-term capital. Third, evaluate the remaining funds and place them into a diversified structure designed for long-term value preservation. Finally, review the system periodically, not frequently, to ensure it still reflects actual needs. This approach does not promise high returns. It does not rely on forecasting or market timing. It works because it aligns money with time. Short-term money stays liquid. Long-term money is given the opportunity to offset inflation. Each part does its job. The financial cost of holding excess cash is measurable and avoidable. By replacing passive accumulation with intentional structure, households reduce silent losses and increase stability. This is not about being aggressive or conservative. It is about being deliberate. Keeping cash feels safe. Using it without limits is not. A clear system transforms cash from a hidden liability into a controlled tool. Over time, that shift is the difference between financial drift and financial stability.